Partners in Ministry, a presentation of Josiah White's Quakerdale Foundation, dedicated to growing ministry support networks, introducing people to a cause that connects with their heart, bringing hope and encouragement to our communities as we seek together to serve as Christ served.
Welcome to Partners in Ministry. I'm your host, Dan Smith, and today I'll be talking with Lyle Miller. Lyle is a stewardship consultant for Everence Financial. In this interview, we're going to take a look at why an estate plan is important, what the elements of an estate plan are, and dive deeper into last wills and testaments. Welcome, Lyle. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan. It's always good to see you.
Really looking forward to this conversation. So, from time to time, we'll hear the term estate plan. Now, what exactly is an estate plan?
Yeah. When we hear the words estate plan, I think oftentimes we think just, of the will, right? Because that's sort of the one that maybe gets the most attention. But in reality, I'd like to think of an estate plan really as a comprehensive set of things, set of documents, and other things as well that kind of help us to make decisions around the kinds of questions that we'll be wrestling with as we approach the end of life. And really, one of the most significant pieces as to why we have an estate plan is that ability to make those decisions and to document those decisions in advance so that you can make those decisions. I mean, the reality is that all of us has an estate plan in place because there are state laws that say this is what will happen if there's not another piece in place. And so really what an estate plan is a set of conversations to guide you and to guide the decision makers around your end of life kinds of questions.
Okay, great. So when should I start thinking about the possibility of creating one?
Sure. Well, you've maybe heard the sort of the analogy of the question, when is the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is sort of 20 years ago was the best time to plant a tree, but the second best time to plant a tree is today. Well, it's sort of the same thing that I would say the best time to think about a will was some time ago, but the next best time to do that is now. Oftentimes people are especially maybe prompted to think about these kinds of things at some of the, what you might say, life change moments. Maybe if we get married and are bringing two households together, if we have children, if there's a breakdown of marriage, if we move from one state to another that has different laws, et cetera, we start a business or close a business, all of these kinds of life change events are times when it's especially appropriate to think about both creating or thinking about the estate plan, but also those can be great prompting questions to say, okay, have things changed in my life that I need to change and adapt the plans that I made, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, or whatever.
Sure. So start right away. Don't waste any time, no matter what your age is. Just get one in place.
Yeah.
And then as major events happen, like for instance, I get married, then I have kids, I buy a home. As these type of things happen, then it's worthwhile revisiting it and making sure that it's up to date and reflecting the changes that are happening in me.
Exactly. And also, I would say too, that even if you don't have one of those sort of major life event kinds of things, it's appropriate every 3 to 5 years, to pull it out and look at it and say, hey, are these still the wishes that I would have? Maybe there wasn't a life change in your life, but maybe the person that you had identified to serve as your executor or trustee or guardian of your children, maybe something has changed for them that makes it appropriate to think about making changes.
That would probably also include charitable work as well, wouldn't it?
Exactly. You've there are new ministries that have grown near and dear to your heart, and so you want to incorporate them. Exactly.
Great. So what are some of the elements that are included in an estate plan? You talked a little bit about a last will and testament, but you said that there are others. What are some of those?
Yeah, there's really a range of things, and we think about these in a couple of different terms. I mean, one of the things we often especially think about the financial stuff, right? So, but I also first I want to highlight, that there are also some key decisions maybe that need to be made around healthcare. What are the choices that you want to make at the end of life, or if you're in poor health or non-responsive in some way, in a coma, whatever. What are your wishes for how you want to spend that time period or whatever? And related to that, who is going to be, if you're not able to make those decisions, who would be responsible for making those decisions for you? And then even with that, then there's also, even some implementation kinds of things. So for example, because of Privacy Act things, their medical professionals may not feel like they can share information with other people. And so a document that says, okay, I'm giving someone the ability to have access to my information, a HIPAA release form. HIPAA is is the acronym for the privacy acts that are there. So those are some of the things in the healthcare space that are important to think about. When it comes to the financial kinds of things, some of the things that we think about are a will, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper. But in a nutshell, it's the document that gives instructions for our assets. For many people, certain situations, it might make sense to have a trust document. Even if you have a trust, it's appropriate to also have a will. And an attorney can help you think about how those pieces fit together. Another piece that can be part of the estate plan, and that frankly can simplify the will piece, is things like beneficiary designations, retirement accounts, bank accounts. Those are often things that can be transferred just by identifying beneficiary designations in advance. And so, frankly, for many people, they can get to the point where there's actually not that much that transitions through the will itself because other stuff has happened in other ways. And then there's also other things that are not necessarily part of the documents that you might do with an attorney, but that really are part of an estate plan. So thinking about things like what's the appropriate amount of life insurance for me or for my household, maybe using that as a way of caring for heirs when I pass away, et cetera. Long-term care insurance. How will I arrange for the care if I'm, one of the roughly 15% of people who will need long-term care at some point in my life. If I'm approaching age 65, that's about a 50-50 likelihood that I might need long-term care. And so how do I want to spend the care? Where do I want to be cared for if I would, get to the point of needing that? And then at an earlier point in life, an issue that often comes up for people is the question of who will be responsible for the care of my children if I have minor children. And that's something that typically can be identified, especially in a will, is who is the person who is responsible, again, for making the decisions. That's not necessarily meaning that person needs to be the legal guardian or something like that if circumstances don't call for that, but to identify who is that person, whether it's relative, whether it's a trusted family friend, who would be responsible for saying, okay, our 12-year-old son or our 14-year-old daughter, this person is responsible for making the decisions on where they might live. So there's really a range of things that are typically part of an estate plan.
Yeah, I was just thinking the other day, I started to, when I was taking a look at our will, and we really need to update ours. Ours is really, really old. So I'm glad we had this conversation to help me. I began to think, you know what? I'll bet I've got about 25 online resources that if you have username and passwords, my wife has absolutely no clue about.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if I was to go today, she would have no way of getting into them. And many of them, they probably wouldn't even let them in unless you had some sort of idea of an account number or something.
Exactly.
So that's something to consider too, I would think, is online resource.
Yes, exactly. Even if that isn't part of the legal documents, et cetera, to be able to identify, where that information is. If you use, one of the software apps that can track your passwords in one place, you probably still need to make sure that somebody has the password to get into that file, right? And so
Right.
that's a great point. The amount of our life that is done electronically these days, it's important that we have arrangements in place for the right people to get that information. Yeah.
Sure. Now, this is quite a list. Are there some of these things that I can do on my own without much help? Is there some of those?
Yeah. There are some pieces. Things like beneficiary designations are something that's typically fairly easy to do, fairly straightforward. Some of the other documents, the way I would describe it is to say, when I think about, when it comes to the first of the year and I'm preparing, and it's time to do taxes or something like that, I probably could plow my way through my taxes, but I feel a whole lot more confident when I work with somebody who specializes in that. Well, sort of in the same way, there are some documents online or, in other sources where you may be able to download those and plug and play, so to speak. But the reality is that working with someone who is specially trained in that way, they're going to be able to ask questions that might help you think of things a little bit differently. And especially, when you're coming at it, for example, from a faith perspective, an attorney that you trust, a financial consultant that you trust is maybe going to think about some of these questions in a slightly different way than sort of the, download from, whatever.com that's just kind of looking at the masses, if you will. Right. And so I think that's one of the other reasons why it's really advantageous to talk with somebody who specializes in this kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So to kind of summarize what we've been talking about, an estate plan really is something that everybody should have. There really isn't anybody that should not have one.
Right.
The best time to get started is yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is it's probably one of those deals that getting some coaching from somebody that works with us on a regular basis is probably a good idea, just to make sure that all the bases are covered. Plus, that's one more person that has a general overview of what it is that's in your plan, so something doesn't accidentally get missed.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I'm assuming then that this is something that Everence can help us with.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have attorneys on staff who can actually write some of these documents because they're always going to be state specific, right? But there's a couple places where we can be very, very helpful. One of them is in helping to ask some of those questions up front, saying, hey, here's some of the things you're going to be thinking about. We often remind people that when it comes to assets, for example, there's really three places that assets can go, right? They can go to the through taxes. They can transition to some place. They can go to heirs. They can go to charity. And so an Everence consultant can be really helpful in thinking through those things. Our experience is that most people are looking to make that first bucket as small as possible. And so we can help that to happen. If you're thinking about charity, if you're wanting to build that into your estate plan, we can be really helpful in helping you think about the most tax efficient ways. What are the assets that are best to give to charity? What are the assets that may be better to give to heirs? And then the other piece, those questions of things like life insurance, long-term care insurance, we're able to help people think about what their future needs might be in those spaces. And then would have, while we don't, like I said, we don't have attorneys on staff to do the, writing the will, et cetera. We do have the ability to provide life insurance or long-term care insurance. So what I would say is that an Everence person can be really helpful as one of the team members. We really encourage you to think of this as a team approach. Your financial consultant, an attorney, maybe an accountant, if you have that. Frankly, even including a pastor in having these kinds of conversations can be a good thing. And other trusted family members, et cetera. Yeah,
sure. Well, I really want to thank you for taking the time to give us a great overview of just estate plans and to kind of summarize. Start yesterday, look at it periodically. get some good coaching for people that deal with this on a regular basis, because it's a whole lot easier to change things as life moves on than it is to try to create it from scratch with the pressure of the moment, I think.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, if you got any questions or if you'd like to learn more about estate plans, you can see Lyle's information right here on the screen, or you can find it in the show notes of this episode on our website. If you'd like to learn more about last wills and testaments, then hang on. We're going to dive deeper on that one here in just a few minutes. So see you on the other side, Lyle.
Okay, thanks. We'll see you soon.
Welcome to Diving Deeper. In this segment, Lyle's going to take us through some of the ins and outs of last wills and testaments. So, Lyle, will you just summarize for us what a will is and its purpose?
Sure. Well, as I again referenced in the previous session, the will is one piece of an overarching broad estate plan, right? But it is the piece that we often pay the most attention to, and oftentimes, sort of for shorthand, we refer to it as the will. But you named the last will and testament, right? And I think that testament piece is really significant. If you think about it, probably the place that most of us think about the word testament is the Old Testament and the New Testament. Well, what is a testament? It's really a document that tells a story, right? And so that's one of the things that a last will and testament can do is describe what your values are, and because of these values, etc., these are the wishes that I have. And a will primarily is going to be focusing on the transfer of assets, but it's also a place that can identify where care for your minor children, if you have minor children, how care for them will be handled. That's often included in a will, as well as, like I said, it can be a place where you can identify, what are the values that drove you as a person. What are the significant character traits? What are the organizations that have been significant for you, et cetera?
Sure. So, once I've got a will in place, when and how are assets distributed to heirs?
Yeah. Well, the reality is that thanks to things like beneficiary designations and transfer on death notifications, et cetera, the reality is that an awful lot of of assets can be transferred outside of a will. So if, for example, you have a retirement account, one of the things when you set that up was that you would have identified who the beneficiary is. Well, if there is a beneficiary, that just happens automatically. It doesn't even flow through the will. And similarly, that will be the case in virtually all of your financial accounts, bank accounts, credit union accounts, retirement accounts, investment accounts. Virtually all of those will have some variation of either a beneficiary designation or a transfer on death ability, right? So much of the things can actually transfer in that. Assets can be a little bit different. Some of those, I'm thinking here of like land, car, vehicles, those kinds of things. Those will vary from state to state, but in many states, you can also you could create a deed that transfers those assets upon death. And if those pieces are all in play, then the reality is the will is just sort of there for the leftovers, if you will. So maybe it's in the will that you identify, maybe some specific bequests, like, who's the family member that's going to receive those quilts that grandmother made and that mom made, or father, mom and dad worked on together, those, who's going to receive the collection of baseball cards or the grandfather clock, or, whatever. Those are things that you can identify specific bequests in the context of a will. And then the will often say, and the remainder goes, will be split in these particular ways, et cetera.
Sure. So how can I include charity in my will? How does that work?
Yeah. There's a number of ways to do that. One of the ways that we historically have thought of doing that is within the will itself, saying, okay, I'd like to, leave X% to my, to the favorite charities, et cetera. The reality is that, There are some assets that are better and some assets that are worse in terms of going to our heirs, for example. And so using these beneficiary designations can often be a great way to transfer assets to charity. So, for example, the classic one is the retirement account. Traditional IRA, traditional 401k, 403b, et cetera, because there hasn't been taxes paid on those. If I give those to my heirs, they're going to have to pay taxes. And now with law changes, they'll likely have to do that within 10 years, right? Well, a great thing to do if you're wanting to incorporate charity would be to name the charity as the beneficiary of those accounts, because the charity is not going to have to pay taxes on those. Give the house, give the farm to your kids, give the retirement accounts to the charity, is a way of thinking of that kind of thing.
Sure. So how can I make sure to incorporate my values in that will, so that it reflects who I am and what I think is important?
Sure. Well, one of the ways is actually what I just described there, in the sense that identifying charity is, one of the pieces of that is you're identifying your values there, right? And so that in itself is one of the ways that you can do that within an estate plan. Otherwise, it's a great opportunity to have a conversation with your attorney. Your attorney can build that kind of language directly into the will, right? I mean, it's, they will sort of have the boilerplate pieces that have the therefores and the hereafter, heretofore, and all the legal language, right? But they can also build into that, because oftentimes you might say, because of my commitment to education, to serving the homeless, et cetera, I have intentionally included a charitable component that's covered in my beneficiary designation. You can also identify, what are the values that really drive me? I wanted to live a joyful and generous life. I wanted to, I care deeply about my family. I wanted to, live life with integrity, et cetera. You can build those kinds of things directly into a will. And then frankly, you can also have accompanying pieces that go with that. I mean, you could write a letter to your children that says, these were the things that were important to me. And one way that you could honor, that you could remember my legacy, if you will, would be to carry your life out in this way. I mean, hopefully you're having those conversations, with your kids, with your grandkids along the way, but it's just a way of, again, sort of documenting those things that remind them of what was important to you.
Sure. As well as could get passed down to future generations as well.
Exactly.
That you may never have met.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, Lyle, I just want to thank you for diving deeper with me today on these wills. If you guys have any questions, or if you'd like to learn more about wills and testaments, be sure and get a hold of Lyle. You see his contact information here on the screen. You can also find it in the show notes of this episode on our website, or in the description of this YouTube video. So on behalf of Everence, Lyle Miller, and Partners in Ministry, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. And until next time, let's get out there and serve as Christ serves.
This has been a presentation of Partners in Ministry, a podcast of Josiah White's Quakerdale Foundation. To learn more and see the show notes for this and other episodes, visit our website. To stay informed of up and coming broadcasts, subscribe to our e-newsletter. To invest in our mission, donate today.